So, welcome, and thank you for coming for this talk. The presentation is about Alice in regulatory land. The crypto ecosystem invents new solutions to all problems: money, finance, identity, organizations. But those concepts are already challenging our grasp of our primitive brains. If we spread on top of them computer science and engineering, we lose most of the people that could help us understand those problems. In the end, no one can fully comprehend the intricacies of the task at hand and the consequences of any proposed solution. This is not you. We live in a complex society, and we use simple concepts to try to understand it. A contract, for instance, we simplify it to this vision of a sheet of paper written with an antiquated font and with a ridiculous prose, and this is what we identify as a contract. This is not the full extent of the concept, but this is an object we can identify, we can comprehend, and from which we can build more complex businesses and societies. But what are the problems that actually crypto tries to solve? For this, let me introduce to you Alice. Alice works as a teacher in a small town. She needs to be able to pay for her groceries, and in the near future, she might want to borrow money to buy a house or also to get a garden and more space for her side businesses. Sometimes, Alice pays for her groceries with cash. She gives a banknote and gets a few coins in exchange. Money is composed of this object that you can exchange for objects of the same value. The word derived from Old French and even Latin, moneta, which is the same origin as minting. So we have really this vision of a physical object when we pay. But when she pays with a card, it is the same money, right? In our mind, it's the money that we already deposited in a bank account that we are just using in a different form. But as you all know here, it's absolutely false. There is the equivalence between the money in her bank account and the cash she has is just a fiction. And the money is not created by minting it anymore. So the money printer can go bare, but it can't create money in the end. So in this context, which is confusing for everyone, something like Bitcoin is comforting. Bitcoin is a digital version of the idea of money as a physical object. It is even in the name, Bitcoin. How Bitcoin units are created? With hardware and energy. We brought back physicality in this distressful world of abstractions. Of course, some lawyers and central bankers can't map this digital physical object with their concepts of money. Indeed, on top of this complexity, we have to deal with different tribes looking at the same thing from different angles. We have technologists building stupid things to solve problems that they don't really have, with the help of business people building organizations to build things to make money. We have academics that try to get famous by publishing ideas that don't really come from them. Either it comes from somebody else or it might be fully wrong. And we have regulators, administrations, central banks, lawyers. They generally try to forge their careers by looking smart without taking too much risk. And finally, politicians that were not good enough at any of the above. So how do they look at this concept together? Let's take a wallet, for instance. It is a physical object that we all know, right? It's something made of fabric or leather that contains money. Translated to the digital world, it can be a file that contains the keys to our money, or it could be a piece of hardware or the software that holds the keys that allows us to sign transactions. Or even the software that enables us to interact with an app by acting as an intermediary with the device where our keys are actually stored. In the end, a wallet does not contain money and might not even contain the keys. And in this context, lawyers looking at the same object add their level of poetry. So we end up with the notion of hosted wallets that actually don't have keys at all and there are a relationship, an account between you and a shaky business. And you better use this kind of wallet, because otherwise you go into the uncharted territory of unhosted wallets, which probably live in the ethers of the internet or something. I took the example of the wallets, but there are many instances of these skeuomorphisms. The application of physical concepts for a false sense of definition. A key, for instance, it's an object that unlocks a door, we all know. But in the digital world, you can use it to sign a message, so it's more like a stamp or a signature. Or the public key, it can be used as an identifier. An account, it is the measure of a position by a company in a contractual relationship. But in Ethereum, it's mostly an entry in a database. Tokens, for engineers, it is a long number that you can use to identify. It can be an entry in a smart contract, or actually it can represent value. So we have different concepts sharing the same words. In this game, from which most of the slides come from, I tried to leverage the physical representation to introduce concepts. It's called haciendas. Haciendas, they were farms that were semi-autonomous in colonial Spain. They shared common infrastructures, such as routes, via reales, and ports where taxes were collected. But each had its own economy or even police. So we could imagine each smart contract and its ecosystem as a hacienda that ultimately shares the blockchain and pay the gas fees together. It is not a virtual world, so I'm not going to shield a new NFT or token. It is just a representation of the DeFi landscape, a physical representation that highlights our confusion problem. As you know, smart contracts are just program in practice, but because of the blockchain context, they have legal, financial, and social consequences. They constitute the backbone of the ecosystem. And in the end, they're not really contracts, and they are even further from the physical image that we have of contracts. But I guess that to use the idea of digital vending machine as a name for smart contract was not as appealing as smart contracts. But let's go back to Alice. She pays with cash, and when she pays with cash, there is no trace of her payments. For all we know, Alice could be actually called Mustafa that likes to wear a wig, and the cashier, the money, and the state would not care. But at the second Alice tries to pay with the digital means of payments, we have to apply all the holy rules of anti-money laundering. Money laundering is a damaging activity. Let's get that straight. People make money from all sorts of shady activities, from gambling, tax evasion, terrorism, and it is proven that money damages twice if criminals can easily reuse the money that they gain from a criminal activity in the regular economy. So money laundering does not go through people like Alice most of the time. But you remember the tribes that we mentioned before? Applying AML sounds smart, and enforcing anti-money laundering rules to the businesses servicing Alice while she pays for it is way less risky than challenging any status quo. So what does AML rules contain? One of the general ideas is that if one of the business sees something suspicious, it should report it to authorities. That lead banks to have compliance departments that will monitor transactions and trigger internal alerts if some criteria are met. That alert will be reported to authorities that may or may not have the resources to actually investigate on it. Another rule is that the participating actors in the payments of Alice will have to exchange information. Each actor uses this information to evaluate the risk of the transaction. It can also be used later by law enforcement to investigate what happened in the payments, but again, they may or may not have the means to actually conduct this work. In practice, the information is usually the name of Alice, a bank account, and some other identifying information, and same for the business receiving the money. But what happens if Alice wants to pay with crypto? As we have seen before, crypto does not really conform with our vision of money. So the body that sets the standard for anti-money laundering just decided to just apply the same rules as was applied for traditional payments to crypto. And the countries that participated in defining the standards are now implementing it. In Europe, you have heard about it. We have the MiCA regulation that created first a category that looks like a financial actor, which is a crypto asset service provider. And they have to be registered, and to be registered, they have to prove that they will conduct this monitoring internally, ensuring that we have this AML applied. And also, they will have to apply those rules of transferring data when there is a payment. But is it really crypto regulation in a sense? Because it does not really apply to crypto itself. It applies to those intermediaries that were already sort of financial institutions. So to just introduce some elements that look a bit more crypto, because remember, the purpose is to look smart, there is the obligation of proving that you own an address when you transfer from your crypto asset service provider funds. So there is at least one little bit that has any connection on how a blockchain works. But looking smart is good, but you can even have more fun when you are part of the regulatory tribe, when you write rules that now people have to figure out what it means. Crypto transactions that happen on a blockchain, and as you know, the blockchain can contain any personal information for privacy purposes, right? And because of GDPR and all its equivalents, you can have any information related to the individual written in the blockchain. So you will need to build a new system to share information. You will need to build a system that shares information of personal data with other businesses. You need to onboard businesses and have the same common infrastructure to exchange this data. You need to create standards for exchanging it. You need to make sure that any business that will receive the data will also be compliant with privacy rules and so protect the data of your users and hold to it as their deal life. So all of this is complex, and in the end, how much new information is really created? Because the crypto asset service provider already knew their customers, and the blockchain already recorded the trail of transaction between them. So what has been gained in this process? Could it have been done before? Could we solicit our different tribes to find more efficient solutions that would facilitate payment while tackling money laundering? We could leverage, for instance, the concept of decentralized identity or verified credentials to prove that a person or an address has been identified by a regulated actor. The proof could be on-chain to be used by smart contracts or in a separate system for more privacy guarantees. This way, the personal information will not be spread among all the actors and servers, diminishing risk of hacks, and leaving the possibility to rewind the money trail. Could we go even further and use zero-knowledge proofs? Create private transaction, integrate some rules, facilitate the self-reveal of the flows of transaction when needed only? If we look at further and we look at DeFi, we have on the one hand those ideals ranging from the sovereign individual to the idea of creating digital commons democratically governed by DAOs. On the other hand, you have companies and startups that try to build businesses by providing services or sometimes just scamming people. In the middle, you have the regulators. They are trying to push everyone toward this category of financial institution that they already know. And in the end, we have all the actors of the ecosystem trying to push further away from them the risk of becoming one of those financial institutions and of fear of a disproportionate burden. My vision is that components and layers could be treated separately. Developers, for instance, could have the responsibility in the conception and in the implementation of the protocols. Done well, these protocols could be the pipes of finance. And despite all the complaints that regulators, institutions make about crypto, make no mistake, everyone understands that there is impressive achievement that have been done by this ecosystem over the past years. There is No doubt about that. All the recent reports show and repeat every time that they see all the risk of crypto as it is today, but they see also that the future of finance should probably look the way this ecosystem works. And this is not me saying it. A lot of reports have been in that direction. So this is one aspect of it, the developer side that should be protected from the risk of becoming financial institutions in order to continue to innovate with all the factors that make it innovate, this open source ecosystem, the composability, the traceability, and so on. And when we say developers, we generally think of individual developers, but there are also companies providing technologies. Yes, and we all know that there are risks associated with that, but there are different risks than the one of a financial institutions. For instance, billions have been hacked in crypto because of errors, bugs, and negligences. And currently, no governmental agency is equipped to analyze, to prevent, to provide guidelines, and even more to regulate in details all this activity. So this is the easy way to go back to financial intermediaries regulation because you can't deal with what's the strongest difficulty. The second element is the protocol and its operations. The deployment by a third party, the alternative front ends, the decentralized governance are all ways to mitigate legal risk from the initial team because it is not desirable for them to have all the burden to become a financial actor. But my view is that someone needs to advertise, to accompany users, to identify improvements. And currently, out of fear of regulation, all this important activity is only left to Discord and governance forums with drama and indifference. Could we clarify the roles of those DeFi gateways that don't have the custody of the fund, that don't build the protocols, but are facing the needs and pains of the customers? So, as a conclusion, we might be entering in a phase of maturity for crypto, as this picture illustrates. Part of the dreams and aspirations of the prior decade has vanished, but this ecosystem has gone beyond expectations. The question now is to better identify the objectives of individual projects and the values of the ecosystem as a whole, and from there to work on the fundamental concepts and representations to shape new models, structures, and regulations. Hopefully, all of these to bring valuable services to Alice. I will be extremely happy to continue working on that and for your question. And as a final note, I would like to say many thanks to all the people that contributed in brainstorming that led to these ideas. In particular, I'm thinking of Ben, Marina, Jon, and Maria, and all the others that have been involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. Questions, please.
Anyone questions?
So this is slightly off topic. I went on your website and I spent literally an hour on it, going all the way around the, what is it? I don't really get it, because you've got the images on the background, and I've wasted so much of my life wandering around that digital world. What actually was it?
The slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a game you can find which is called Haciendas.xyz, and it's really a prototype just to discover a bit DeFi and crypto with a funny interface.
Okay, yeah, it was quite involving.
Anyone more questions?
Thank you very much, Xavier, and spoken like a true academic, where the goal is to properly name things and have useful words so that we can communicate with each other. I really like the metaphor that you proposed of the hacienda and how this can be seen as a contract or a community that works together and then pays taxes commonly. My question is around what happens when words, as has been happening now, and let's just take NFTs for an example. What happens when words already take on a meaning and inflame a large part of the population? So recently, PlayStation launched collectibles that are absolutely not NFTs, not NFTs, not NFTs, because, just as an example, what happens when we already have an association with some words and some terms, and how can we rebuild or reframe or redefine that? What do you think that process looks like?
Thank you for this very hard question, because I think it's really a core and one of the most important challenges. We have seen that during the regulatory debate on wallets and hosted wallets. I went through that a bit fast, but the real difficulty is that you have people that really don't have enough the base concept to be able to fully understand what we are talking about. Even NFTs is interesting because it became like this trend. At the same time, it designates a specific technology thing that actually shouldn't have a meaning either, because it, in the end, just a standard of a type of smart contract. And we have this difficulty. I don't know what is the best option. Maybe, yeah, industry-led efforts to create common glossaries could be ways to try to publish articles, reports that try to give definitions. I've been participating in many institutional reports, and in each of them, you end up having this glossary of all the blockchain words. By the way, it's funny because all the technical words, you need to put them in the glossary because nobody understands, but really technical economic word, usually it's fine, you know, like everyone knows that, yes, but depends on your culture. You see, so there is a culture of the technical things are not really known, and it's a weird thing, and so we need to redefine, and every time they redefine it, and they don't even reference prior version, so there is nowhere anything that even somebody that wants to go forward can look at. So maybe it's something we should do, write a good glossary that helps as a reference, and it also references the ambiguities and the contradiction in meanings, because we can cope with that. The vocabulary is always ambiguous, but we need some sources to just be aware of those ambiguities.
Great, thank you, Xavier.
Thank you.